Today, we're looking at Robert Oster's Tangerine. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Robert Oster's Tangerine is an orangey red ink. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples, I put the ink into a different pen for a day, I then put it into a Lamy All-Star with a 1.1 stub to take my notes for this video. Now before we look at the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is this very light red that's pushing its way up, and then that dark, rich yellow that we've seen come up a few times. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And the only thing I'm really seeing here is the difference is the ink is creeping its way up and leaving some behind as it's pushing up more than it did on the original chromatography, but it makes me feel that there's going to be no real resistance here. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. Now, I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I am immediately drawn to the lowercase h that starts to blow out. And being very risk-averse in my note-taking, I would not use this because of the amount of blowout that has occurred on that one letter. Water is completely reactivating and removing this ink from the paper. Now, it's not 100% white as the paper, but that's only 30 seconds. So I do feel that given just a little bit more time, that's all that you're going to need. Pen Flush took it a step farther, and we really do see the white of the paper coming through, but I don't think you're going to need the additional chemicals in the flush. Bleach obliterates it, as would be expected, but again, we're going to have no need to use bleach to get this out of your pen. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Tangerine has a viscosity of 1.56, making this a very wet ink. To find my average dry time, I used my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Robert Oster's Tangerine has an average dry time of 18 seconds, making it normal. Now, let's look at the writing sample.
I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub. I choke on nothing. I used a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. I'm going to start out by saying I have fewer writing samples because apparently for some reason, looking at this like this, thought it was going to be bad. Clairefontaine, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feathers, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer bits of shading, just bits of shading. Like in the bottom of an S to the T, that bottom is a little darker than the rest of Oster. The ROB is darker than the ERT of Robert. So there is some shading to be had with this ink. The extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather spread, halo sheen, and spots of shading. In Lazy, we see that it starts very dark and it works its way to a nice mid-tone and then a little bit darker again, a mid-tone on the Z. The is a very dark word in comparison to the word over right next to it. Dog as an entire word is a great mid-tone, so I don't see a lot of shading within the writing, although there's shade. There is some tone differences from word to word. 11 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and it offers some really nice shading, better shading than the extra fine. Brown starts nice and dark on the BR and gets lighter into the N all the way through. Fox has a nice mid-tone, but the bottom loop here is darker, and then it's nice and light coming out of the F. And it stays as a lighter tone into the X of Fox, where it gets nice and dark. Over starts light and works its way dark. Beautiful, and 14 seconds to dry. Now, when I look at the scrubby of both, I see plenty of color variation. The extra fine, you have to look far left to far right on camera, and it's there. And the extra fine, I didn't see it as much. The medium, I see more color variation, and I saw it more. And the smear test, you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Tomoe River has no bleeding, but it has ghosting because it's Tomoe River and it's known for its power of ghosting. Invisible inks ghost on this paper. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and Tomoe River killed its shading. Shade killer. The extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, 16 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine and the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 22 seconds to dry, and that is because of the shade assassin. That is Tomoe River paper. The scrubby for both show no color variation, and we got none. The smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. Rhodia, no bleeding and no ghosting, the 1.1 has. No feather, spread, halo, sheen. No shading. Not on this one. The extra fine is slightly lighter in tone than the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It has spots of shading. The H in the is a bit darker than the rest of the word. K in quick is a bit darker. The B in brown is a bit darker. The X in fox. But jumps is a very dark word all the way through. And dog is a very nice mid-tone all the way through. 11 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and it is giving some decent shading. Decent. Now, it's working opposite. I see lighter letters instead of darker letters. Like the O in fox is lighter. Just the O. Okay? The W in brown is lighter than the rest of brown. The Y in lazy is lighter than the rest of lazy. So the shading seems to be working opposite. Instead of getting an occasional dark letter, we get an occasional light letter in 13 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine shows some color variation, looking far left to far right. We did get some color variation. And the medium, far left to far right, we do see some color variation, not as much. We didn't get as much in the writing sample. And it worked backwards. Now the smear test you could likely recover if you smeared while you were writing in Franklin Christoph paper. No bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is a slightly lighter tone than the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shading in this writing, 8 seconds to dry. The medium is a significantly darker tone than the extra fine. Even much darker than the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows plenty of color variation, but I didn't get any. The medium shows none, and I got none. And the smear test, I believe you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. And last up is black and red notebooks. We get no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. Yep. The extra fine is a slightly lighter tone than the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and there it is. We get some shading back. The H in the is a bit darker. The K in quick is a bit darker. The B in brown. The word the is darker than all the writing around it. And the word over is a nice light to mid-tone. So we do get a bunch of color variation in the extra fine. It took 9 seconds to dry. Now medium becomes a significantly darker tone than the extra fine or the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade, 12 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows some color variation looking at far left to far right, and we do get some in the writing. The medium shows none, and we got none. And the smear test, yeah, you could recover it if you smeared while you were writing. You could. That is all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Tangerine, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I wanted a nice blue. I went with Diamine Asa Blue. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Tangerine? I went into this with really kind of low expectations of what I was going to get looking at the sample. And I couldn't have been more wrong unless I was calling this ink a horse. I was really seeing much more red in the sample vial, but what went down in my writing sample very much was a fantastic orange that shaded very well. It's not as representative of what was going on in the swatch, and it really is a good example of how swatching doesn't really match the sample in writing. That's why I lean towards what is in the writing to be able to see the true color of an ink. Now, if you like orange inks, this is a really good one to give a shot to, because again, the swatches that we see don't really match the color that I'm getting when I write with it. It's a great orangey red. Thanks for watching.